Hello viewers, welcome back to our YouTube channel, KC Accountants Education Center. Today we want to look at the reporting framework. Now, in the previous video, we talked about the regulatory framework, where we talked about the laws, or the legal framework, where we talked about the acts, where we talked about the regulations, where we talked about the manuals for the different private sector entities. We also looked at what we call the institutional framework, where we basically looked at the different institutions that are responsible to make sure that public funds or public resources are managed well. We also said that once we look at the institutional framework, we said it is comprising of it is broken into two major institutions. We looked at the central government, and the central government is composing of the ministries, the agencies, and also the local government, which has the different municipalities, sub-counties, town councils, and others. But as we look at the institutional framework in the central government, we shall look at the institutional framework. We shall also look at the institutional framework in the local governments. For example, we shall look at the local government finance commission, as I said in the previous video. We shall look at the district local council, or the local council, basically the local council chairperson. We shall look at the mayor. We shall look at the people like the chief executive officer, that is the COW. We shall look at the chief finance officer, the town clerk, the town treasury, the chief internal auditor, and the local government council with their roles. So we shall look at their roles, their functions, and the powers. So once you have looked at that as the institutional framework, we want now to focus our attention on the reporting framework. This is still within the introduction to public sector financial management. The reporting framework is now like our topic number 3. The reporting framework is basically comprising of what we call the standards. It has all the standards. Now, this reporting framework is one of the short topics in this paper concerning basically what we call the accounting cycle. Shall look at the accounting cycle. We also have what we call the accounting policies on top of the standards, because the first one is standards. You know, when you're reporting, we have standards. We report based on the standards. The standards here, we call them IFRS. IFRS. These are the standards. When we are dealing with private sector, we are looking at ISS or IFRS. But now, These are the standards that we use in the private sector. But when you come to the public sector, we call them IPSASs. IPSAS, it is the full, that is the short form, but it is called the International Public Sector Accounting Standards. Accounting Standards, IPSAS. These IPSASs, they are the ones that are replacing what we normally know as the ISs and the ifrs in the private sector. And good enough they reduced these standards, because in the previous syllabus of paper 14, we had very many standards, but here they removed some of the standards. Because the reason as why they removed some of the standards is because they are similar to the ISs and ifrs. In other words, once they remove some standards, it doesn't mean that those standards are not necessary. It is because someone has an idea, a student has an idea about it, and those that they have left, or those that have remained, it means that there is something new for the student to learn. What you have to understand is that IPSASs and ISs, they are the same. They all mean standards. You may find that some standards, some ISs are actually the same as IPSASs in terms of their treatments, but it is just the name that is changing. The other one, we call them International Accounting Standards. This one, they call it International Public Sector Accounting Standards. It's just the name that is changing. So they are somehow related. So some of the standards that were removed is because the student has an idea of what we basically talk about that particular IPSAS. So, because in paper 14, we used to have about 30 standards, but at least for now, they have reduced now. I think we have like 10 standards or IPSASs, 10 standards in this new syllabus or paper 13. But although in practice, when we try to do some numbers, we may actually cover more than 10 standards, because there are some standards that were removed, but their application will be needed in other standards. So we shall find ourselves picking some of the information from that, even though they are not on the syllabus. So even though the standards have been reduced, but when you are practicing, we may cover more than the standards that are within the syllabus. Reason is because some standards cut across. You may find that there is a treatment that is needed in another standard, or there is some information like for instance, there is no way you can talk about PPE and you don't talk about impairment. But once you come to these standards, IPSASs, you may find that the IPSAS for let's say impairment was removed, but they have left you with the standard of PPE. So automatically you'll find yourself studying impairment, because we know assets are going to be impaired, even though the standard is not on the syllabus. So those are some of the things, and I will keep on talking about them as we progress, that this is not on the syllabus, but we are studying it maybe for the sake of getting such and such knowledge. So that's basically what I'm meaning here, that some standards may not actually be on the syllabus, but we may study them. So the example I've given you is, for instance, of course, now if you look at the standard, there is that major standard. Let me also give you the standard itself. We have IPSAS 17. IPSAS 17 is PPE. The other side we call it IS 16 PPE. The treatment is almost the same, but the terminologies are changing because the other one is private sector, this is public sector. So the terminologies are changing. You are also saying that this is IPSAS, this is IS. So IPSAS 17 PPE, as I said, once you are left with IPSAS 17 PPE, and you find that in the syllabus they have dropped the impairment, they have dropped that IPSAS for impairment. But if you base on the past paper numbers, you'll find that once you see this question that has been examined on PPE, within the information they have given you, they have also brought in things to do with impairment. So you find yourself, even though the standard for impairment has been taken off, you have to go through it because some information is supposed to be used within the PPE standard. So we shall see some of the past paper numbers. You will see that we shall be able to cover impairment even though it was removed, because there is no way you are going to account for PPE without accounting for impairment. So even if the standard for impairment isn't on the syllabus, we cannot leave it out. So we shall be covering a little bit of impairment, something small that will help us to understand better on how to deal with PPE. So we shall look at some of the trial numbers as we progress through. Therefore, we shall be covering some things that are not on the syllabus, some little few things that are going to be outside the syllabus so that we can actually be proactive. We guard something before it happens, because you may actually forget to be prudent. You say this one it is out of syllabus, but you find it in your question. And also, we shall also go through the standard setting process in order to know how these IPSASs are set. That is within the financial reporting framework. So we shall go through the standard setting process and also the conceptual framework. The conceptual framework. And this conceptual framework for IPSASs is not different from the conceptual framework for ISs and the IFRSs. They are the same, because there are some few things that vary, but they are very similar, because the major differences within the conceptual framework of IPSASs and the conceptual framework of ISs and IFRSs is basically in the terminologies, the terms that are being used. That will be the only difference, but the rest may not change, as we shall see once we go to some of these IPSASs or some of these standards. Now, one thing that you need to understand is the fact that in paper 13, this public sector finance management, we are going to look at little things on standards, but we shall detail so much on other work, because we are going to have very few standards, but we have a lot of information that is not on standards. We have a lot of information that is not on the standards. Standards are going to be very few, but we have a lot of work to handle. So, in other words, what's being done currently in public sector, especially public sector of Uganda, because the reason as why they modified the paper from the public sector accounting and reporting to public sector financial management is, in fact, just to look at how do we manage the finance within the public sector, from the point of how do we report, how do we account certain things, and how do we report certain things. But we moved from that to something of managing the funds, because they are basically looking at the current trends. You look at how these enterprises are actually moving, then you try to be, they are trying to be a little bit considerate so that they can let you understand how, because you're not supposed to just know how to account and how to report certain things, but the main focus should be at least on managing the resources, or management of resources within the public sector entities. And that's why we are seeing we are having a lot of theoretical aspects that are not standards. We have very few standards, but we have a lot of information to handle that is not within the standards. Now, as I said, we are going to look at a quite number of topics, and so far we have looked at 3. We've started. This is an introduction, but at least we have started. So, of course, after this, once we look at these IPSASs, we shall be able to cover some other topics. And maybe the major thing is actually once we look at these standards, once you cover all the standards, maybe they wanted to mix up things with the theory and the standards, not necessarily having things to do with just standards where someone is just going to be knowing how to account, how to report, and someone does only that without putting in the effort of understanding how basically can we manage the resources. Because the reason as why we are managing the resources is because the money that we are using in these public sector entities are coming from our taxes. So it is more of how are we utilizing the resources than just a mere looking at how the resources can be, how certain things can be accounted for, and not focusing on the efficiency utilization of the resources that we have in the public sector. So under these IPSASs, the ones that are still on the syllabus, because we have those IPSASs still on the syllabus. So I want us to look at this in the next video, where we are going to analyze the standards that are within the new syllabus of paper 13. And we look at the old syllabus, we see the standards that were removed from paper 14. So that's what we are going to focus on in the next video. So thank you for watching. Share these videos to your friends and family so that they can be able to get the same information or the same knowledge that you are trying to get from watching these videos.